Welcome to this video on Pluto in the third house in astrology. I'm Cassandra, the SaffronSage, helping you use astrology to evolve. And today we are talking about Pluto in the third house. If you have Pluto in your natal chart in the third house, this video is for you. We are first going to talk about the mythology of Pluto, what Pluto means in the astrology chart. We'll briefly touch on the nature of the third house, and then we will talk all about what it means when you have Pluto, the planet of power and transformation, in the third house of communication. So let's get into it. So first things first, when it comes to Pluto, Pluto was known as Hades, Lord of the underworld. And one of the things Pluto is most popular for in the mythology is the Persephone myth. So in the Persephone myth, he kidnaps her, takes her to the underworld. Now, Persephone was, the daughter of Demeter or Ceres, depending on which myth you are listening to. And, Demeter was the mother, Ceres, the nurturer, the one who harvested the crops and took care of the earth. And so when Persephone was kidnapped by Pluto, this is what caused winter originally. So Ceres got mad because she didn't want her daughter to be kidnapped. Surprise. But here's the thing, is that Pluto was able to trap Persephone in the underworld for longer because she ate some pomegranate seeds. So this was how he sort of finagled his way into keeping her part of the time and then having to let her go part of the time. So now, when Persephone is in the underworld and Ceres, her mother, is upset, this is when we have winter every year. So she's in the underworld for 6 months and then she's above ground, back with her mom for the rest of the year. Pluto is also known as the god of wealth because diamonds and jewels come from underground. So in Roman mythology, Pluto is known as Pluto, and in Greek mythology, he's known as Hades. His identity was actually fused by two different entities. One is Pluto. The other is Pluton, also known as Dispater, who had power over the underworld. Dispater also had power over mineral wealth, and the underworld was known as the resting place for departed souls. So Pluto was sort of this watcher of the departed souls. Now, to me, in all this research that I did on Pluto, I really felt like he doesn't seem that bad compared to how bad he is made out to be. There isn't a lot that makes Pluto out to be a bad guy until we get to the end of this story, which is I'll tell you in a minute. But basically, Pluto, his dad was Saturn, Jupiter was his brother, Ceres was his sister, and he also was brothers with Poseidon and Juno and Vesta were his sisters as well in the mythology. So this is where there is a little cringe factor, right? Because that means if Ceres was his sister, that Persephone was his niece. So here's the part of the story that I didn't know until I did this research, which is that the reason why Pluto fell in love with Persephone in the first place was because Cupid shot a dart at him, because he didn't want him to be lonely. Okay, so this is another thing that just makes me feel like Pluto himself isn't as bad as we make him out to be. Now, that doesn't mean that Pluto in the chart doesn't have negative consequences. It does. Power corrupts, for sure. And I also think it's interesting, that wealth and power, they do tend to go together if we consider how you really do have to have a certain amount of personal power to amass wealth. And then how wealth really does lend itself to then having more power in the world. So I found that correlation interesting as well. And the fact that when Pluto fell in love with Persephone, what he did was kidnap her. Disclaimer, some versions of this story say she went willingly. So we don't know whether he truly kidnapped her or not, but let's just say he did. This really shows how much Plutonic love, if someone with strong Pluto energy loves you, they're going to want to own you. And that is a fact. So that is a brief overview of the story of Pluto and Persephone, the general mythology of Pluto as ruler of the underworld and watcher of departed souls. And one of the things about this story that is we really need to understand is that the Persephone myth is not a story of a poor little girl who was kidnapped and was a victim. Because what happened when Persephone went to the underworld with Pluto, she became queen of the underworld. And this is a metaphor for being the ruler of our own subconscious mind. So our subconscious mind is only scary, hell is only scary. They say heaven and hell are in the mind. And I feel like that is so true. And, this story really is about embracing the skeletons in the closet of our subconscious mind, being able to rule and self-govern and be mature. Because when Persephone went to the underworld, she was a maiden. And how the story goes is maiden, mother, crone. And so it's about so many things, more than just a dude who kidnapped a girl, but just the ability to grow up, the ability to face that subconscious mind, face our own personal underworld so we can be the rulers of it too. So with that in mind, we're going to move on to Pluto as the definition of Pluto as a planet in the astrology. So Pluto by sign is going to tell us generational themes. These are going to be the same themes that you have with all the other people born at the same time as you, because their Pluto is going to be in that same sign. This is because Pluto transits take 14 to 30 years. So of course this is not a personal placement because it takes so long for Pluto to move through a sign. Now by house, this is where it gets personal, because Pluto by house is going to tell us the way that we move through life. It's going to tell us our natural karmic way of relating to the world. And usually there is a bit of a need with this placement to transform. So it will also tell us the area of life where we have the potential to transform the most. This does not mean everybody will, but there's that potential there. Now, every Pluto has a polarity point, which is the opposite house. So if your Pluto is in the 3rd house, then the polarity point is the 9th house. And this is the energy to learn how to master, to transcend, to really live out the evolutionary intention of this placement. And now the nature of the 3rd house. The 3rd house is a cadent house. The cadent houses are the 3rd house, 6th house, 9th house, and 12th house. These houses are tended to be considered a little bit less strong in terms of planetary strength. They are not on angles. They're not on the angles, and they're not next to the angle. They're the 3rd house after the angular houses. And so because of this, these houses tend not to have quite as much planetary strength, although they are significant. The 3rd house is often referred to as the house of communication, and it deals with the mind. It deals with how we process information, how we communicate, how we think, how we analyze, how we share information, whether it be verbally or written. And there's also, a lot of significations that go with this 3rd house. So this would be our immediate environment, our neighborhood, our local environment, short distance travel, our automobiles, cars, any kind of transportation goes in the 3rd house. It's the house of communication. Now, the 3rd house and the 9th house both deal with communication, teaching, and learning. But we see in the 3rd house is going to be more like elementary education or teaching beginners or, early life when it comes to learning, and also little tidbits of information when it comes to communication. So that can be like writing something on a daily basis that you write all the time. It can be communicating something that you communicate all the time, like making a short phone call. Whereas the 9th house, that's going to be the long-term education. This is higher education, long distance trips, foreign travels, things that are more have a nature that they are more in depth. So both houses can deal with publishing, and writing and speaking. But with the 9th house, you're looking more at publishing a novel, whereas the 3rd house, you might publish a blog post every day. Those are just examples, but the difference is how the information is presented and the depth of information. So in the 3rd house, we're looking at information that isn't super deep. It's just like the facts, the things that are verifiable, the things that can be spoken very quickly, short answers to questions, things like this. Small repeated communications. This can also be the house of siblings, our early education. So that is what I have for the meaning of the third house. And now we're going to move on to the good stuff, Pluto in the third house. So when Pluto is in the third house, this person is going to have this natural desire to communicate. They are going to want to know things. And because Pluto is like an anchor in the chart, there's this very, very strong draw, for this person to want to know more, to gather more facts, to gain more information, to learn all there is to learn. And it's not in a ninth house way, which means it's not in a going deep and deep and deep and deep into one subject kind of a way. It's knowing a little bit about a lot. So this person will want to know a little bit about everything. They won't necessarily be drawn always to go super, super in depth unless they have other placements in their chart that make that make sense. So this person wants to focus on the mind. They're going to want to focus on their intellect. They're going to focus on what they know, and they're going to want to make logical sense of life. They're going to make logical sense of their existence. They want to understand things. So there's really a need to gather information and integrate it and really get to the bottom of things with this placement, especially because Pluto, is the planet of depth. And so even though the ninth house rules that deeper information, it's almost like this person with Pluto combined with that third house could have a wealth of information, but it's probably going to be little facts rather than a long dissertation about something. So they're going to be in their environment. They're going to have new experiences, and then they're going to process that and make sense of all those new experiences. They really will want to grow. They're going to want to consistently keep knowing more and learning more and doing more. So for some people, this placement is going to show up more in their studies, that kind of thing. And others may just be less studious, less academic, and more interested in doing something new and then going and doing something else and then processing that information and making sense of that and continually expanding their view on life, continually adding more to what they know or what they've experienced. Now, with the third house, this is about how we label and identify things in the world using words, right? Using vocabulary. And this really does help the Pluto third house person to understand their place in the universe by going out and just understanding what everything is. So again, there is this natural curiosity here. And the thing is that for these people, emotional security comes from understanding how things work, from satiating their curiosity. There's a deep, almost insecurity about what they know or don't know. They want to understand their world so their world can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And again, the desire here is to know facts, not necessarily beliefs, but to know facts that are verifiable, that you could research and know the source of the information. That is more of the type of information that this person tends to be drawn to. And again, they feel a sense of emotional security based on how well they understand their environment. So they're going to want to know about their environment. They might want to know their environment, know all the roads, I bet this person, when they travel, they want to know where everything is, where the store is to go, or stuff like that. I bet if you have this placement, that is how you are. You want to know your environment, and there's a sense of security in that. So there's a challenge built into this placement, which is that you always want to take on new information, but sometimes that information is going to contradict old information. So there's a sort of push and pull here between that desire to take in more and the inability to handle everything that you want to take in. Now, the more the person identifies with whatever they know, the harder this little crisis is going to be. Every Pluto has a little crisis associated with it. So if they feel like they are what they know, the more they feel like that, the more with this placement you're going to have a hard time having a new viewpoint or gathering new information. It's like the information doesn't fit into the existing framework, and this can cause a bit of a challenge. This can make you restless. There is a restlessness with this placement because, it's always seeking, it's always wanting more information, it's always wanting to learn something new. And there's this feeling with this placement that if only I find that one fact, that one piece of information, that holy grail of information, then I'll feel okay. It's almost like there is this insecurity that you feel about your mind, about what you know, that like compels you to know more and more and more. But that feeling never comes. And I'll talk more later in this video about the polarity point and how to use that polarity point to evolve with this placement. So you can find yourself always referencing this collection of facts, this collection of data, and always seeking the next fix when it comes to that information. Some people with this placement might have a ton of books they've never read, or a ton of books they've only read pieces of. So this is how that sort of mental energy and that sort of like natural, agitation sort of funnels into this desire to know more, know more, know more. When it comes to these people's relationships, whether it be significant other or friendships, your relationships will help you process information. You're naturally going to need to talk things out to process it. And just telling people about stuff will be helpful to you. It's like you have a lot of mental pent-up energy. And when you just tell someone what you're thinking or what you're up to, it doesn't have to be a deep conversation. It can really be anything, like what you did that day. But somehow it just kind of releases the pressure when you're able to do that. You can be a compulsive talker sometimes. Sometimes people with this placement will be compulsive talkers. Not everyone, but sometimes. Now, again, there is that feeling like you're always going to want to know more. You always want to learn. You always want to get that next fact, that next piece of information. But sometimes it's like there's not actually enough space in anyone's head to know all the things that a Pluto third house person would want to know. So this is something to keep in mind, that for people with Pluto in the third house, that it's like your desire to know something might be bigger than the storage, your mental hard drive that you have, that you can put the information in. And so this is because all these facts put together, they while they're stimulating to the person, what they lack here, and we'll talk about how to resolve this, but what they lack is a holistic foundation that ties them all together. So this is the thing about, those quick bits of information, is there's nothing to make them a cohesive whole. They're just random pieces of information kind of scattered through the brain. And so even though you might remember every single thing, there's a lack of integration, and that is what's going to actually answer the feeling of dissatisfaction, the feeling of not even dissatisfaction, but that feeling of restlessness. So again, this is that mental insecurity where you feel like if you just find that one piece of information, it's going to make you feel secure, but it doesn't. It doesn't make you feel secure. It makes you go, okay, now I know this, and then now I want to go on and learn the next thing. That sense of security just gets pushed out into the future to go learn or explore that next thing. So with this placement, your inner center is always changing because you have this need to always be learning. Again, it's like you want to feel that sense of groundedness, but there's a need to always be changing. And so part of your purpose is to always be learning. And so that need to continually add new information, that will always be there. But the evolutionary lesson of this placement is to realize and understand the limitations of the mind and add in the intuition. So now we're going to talk about the polarity point, which is the 9th house. And what this does for the 3rd house person is so powerful. So there's so much potential to transform and to use what all these facts you've gathered in a very transcendent way, in a very, very powerful way. So we're going to talk about how to do that through the polarity point, which is the 9th house. So for people with Pluto in the 3rd house, when you learn to rely on your intuition, this is how you go deeper. This is how you start to cultivate that inner sense of groundedness that allows you to have the foundation to put all the facts onto. So this is what can be missing for the third house Pluto person. With your intuition, you can now put everything together, and there's an element of meaning, right? The element of meaning that we find in that ninth house. The reason why, or the deeper meaning, or the deeper philosophy, this becomes the thread running through all those facts and bits of information that stabilizes, becomes a stabilizing influence in your life. So how do these people do this? How can you embrace that ninth house polarity point? Is to learn to quiet the mind, because your mind is naturally very busy with this placement. So learning to quiet the mind, learning practices that help you slow down the mind. This usually, oftentimes too, learning to quiet the mind is a piece of it. The other piece of it is kind of aligning with a belief system. Now, this placement will probably be tempted to say, I don't have any one belief system. I pick and choose all these different pieces from all these different ones that I like. But there is a need for this placement to find at least something that they can say, this I believe in. It doesn't have to be a whole religion. It could be just a smaller philosophy of some kind. And what it does is it gives you an anchor, this emotional, mental, and energetic anchor to one set of values, one set of beliefs, one way of seeing the world that helps you, stabilize you, and ground you. Now, you get to choose whatever this is, and it can be something you're in alignment with. It doesn't have to be mainstream. But this understanding becomes a basis from which all the other little facts can be filtered through and understood. And this is going to bring the underlying stability that you crave with this placement. It's like the truth, right? The facts transform into the truth. And the truth becomes the glue that hold all these facts together that you already know and you've already learned, but allows them to really be more powerful and have more meaning for you. So until this lesson is learned, if you have this placement, you can have lots of little confrontations with people where, you are having conversations with people and, there, because of the need for this placement to cling to the facts, it can put strain on conversations. And usually either you will maybe unconsciously, subconsciously come across like you know more than the other person. And, instead of listening, sometimes this can happen with this placement, especially in your early days, where instead of listening in a conversation is where, that person is talking and it's almost like you're just waiting for them to say something you can respond to. And then, when you respond, it kind of squashes the natural intuitive flow of the conversation. And I would say even someone with maybe other placements that make this worse could have this even to a point where they have a complex about what they're going to say, and then they make it weird, by like someone saying something and they're like planning in their head what they're going to say, and then by the time they say it should have been said, like it was something that the other person said 20 minutes ago, and it's like the inability to flow in a conversation, the challenge with having that back and forth intuitive flow of information, where the Pluto third house person will naturally start off in life with a more rigid, a more limiting view that in conversations causes some of these challenges. Now, another way they can have this challenge their conversations is instead of replying like a springboard, now I get to say what I always wanted to say anyway. Instead of doing that, they actually can end up just walking away. Like they could even just shut down, walk away when the other person is telling you stuff that is so different from what you believe. Because again, sometimes, especially in early life with this placement, you can have this almost rigid feeling about conversations, this rigid feeling about what you know versus what the other person knows. You can have a complex around needing to prove all the stuff you know. You can rattle off facts to people that they do not want to know or care about, when they are a little bit more concerned about like how the conversation feels, or they're trying to tell you a joke and then you correct them and tell them the etymology of the word that they just used. Okay, so this is like the worst case scenario kind of playing out of this placement, where the person is so obsessed with facts that they come across like a computer almost. And remember that, with these videos, that there a lot of personal things in the chart can mitigate things, or they can make things worse. And so you always have to listen and see what resonates and leave the rest for general videos like this. Okay, other challenges in conversation can be leaving a conversation feeling like, oh my God, I should have said this, I should have said that, and kind of like kicking themselves a little bit after a conversation, really regretting what they could have or should have said. Another thing is that, again, they can disengage completely and just totally walk away when the conversation goes in a way that is like beyond what they want to know, or like completely disagrees with them. So there is a challenge with accepting viewpoints that are different. So when the person is able to embrace this evolution and embrace their intuition and really bring in more of that intuitive flow into conversations and to how they perceive the information in the first place, instead of being a bunch of collection of solid facts, but like, information that flows in right when you need it. So this evolution will cause you to become a person who, doesn't need to defend facts anymore, because once you have that higher viewpoint and that connection to the intuition, that defensiveness, that feeling like, oh, I have to make sure they know what the truth is, that can go away. Because once you are confident, that intuition, that quiet power in your mind, you don't need to defend it anymore. So you can also release that need to be defensive of your beliefs as well, and embrace a more tolerant perspective of other people's frameworks or viewpoints. You can also find that this can lead you to a quest to really understand the whole truth instead of just what the facts say. And so this can cause a shift and almost a healing in terms of how you relate to what you know. Whereas maybe you're no longer worried about proving what you know. Maybe you're no longer feeling that obsessive need to learn something new, but rather intuitively drawn to that next book that you can read the whole book this time. Now, this is the highest use of the mind. The highest use of the mind is to not just learn rote facts, not just know random things, but to be able to, not just reason and communicate, but to express truth. So there's this transcendence and this transformation that people with Pluto in the third house can experience, that they can go through, where instead of just trying to learn that next thing and wanting to know a series of facts, they can move beyond this and really connect with what the truth is. And when those facts have a deeper meaning, when that intuition is involved, the back and forth conversation becomes smoother. And, the ability to focus on just the information that you really need to know, and really use your mental faculties, which are strong and powerful, in a way that is more aligned and more intentional and more useful. And then all those facts that you learned up until this point, any planet in the third house that's really significant, there is the potential of having mind-heart coherence. Okay, and that's what we're working toward. That's the highest evolution of the third house, is mind-heart coherence. So it's not just the mind as a computer gathering all this information, but the mind as a function that is connected to the heart, connected to this inner knowing and the intuition. So there's a little more here on the personality. So with the third house Pluto person, the personality, you're naturally going to have a deep and penetrating mind. You will be able to find the weakness in someone else's argument easily. You'll just zero in on it. You can also probably see past people who are lying, or at least when someone's communicating, you have a tendency to understand their hidden motives for what they are saying. You can also be great at researching and digging up facts, but usually this is only going to apply to things that you are naturally curious about. There is a natural power with this placement emanating from the hands. So these can be the energy workers of the world, you know, my Reiki healers, my Reiki people, and even like theta healing where you're using your hands, sometimes massage therapy, anything that is like using your hands. It's almost like you have this intuitive way of knowing what the body needs through your hands. You can, throughout your life, this is another part of this placement, because Pluto is our greatest potential of transformation. Again, though, it doesn't mean we'll do it. Everyone doesn't always, you know, live out their Pluto. Everyone doesn't always embrace that polarity point and try to incorporate it. But throughout life, you can have very, very different views as an adult than whatever your views were as a child, right? So you have a potential to transform your mindset that is very powerful if that's something you want to do. Again, if you do that. Now, some people, that transformation may show up in their environment, like the environment they live in as an adult is quite different from the environment they lived in as a child, or other things like that. You know, like the kind of car you drive as an adult is a very different kind of car. Anything third house topic related, you have the potential to transform, including your communication, including, you know, and that really does infuse a power in your words if you're able to embrace that polarity point. And sometimes people with this placement are fascinated by taboos and mysteries and the occult. And another thing that can happen with this placement is you can have very, very intense relationships with your siblings. Now, for someone where this is positively aspected, this can be that you have a sibling who is very powerful and you get along well and they help you out. For someone where this is more negatively aspected, this can be like intense, powerful, like power struggles with siblings where they're always trying to one-up you, and that can have varying degrees of intensity, right? So for some people watching this, you could have horrible relationships with your siblings where they are just very destructive forces in your life. For other people, your siblings can be very transformative forces in your life. That is if you have siblings and you have this placement. Some people with this placement are going to have difficulties in childhood that can range from, again, more light to more intense. Pluto is not, you know, Pluto's no joke when it comes to power struggles, abuse, things like that. Just because you have Pluto in the third house does not mean you have had abuse, but some people do. Some people with Pluto, even though it's not the placement of home, right, that would be the fourth house, Pluto in the third is like your immediate environment may not have been safe as a child in some way. And again, this can range from a really light form of that to a very more intense and dark form of that. Some people are bullied by their brothers and sisters or their siblings. Some people are bullied in their classes. It just varies person to person. But overall, this placement is all about the mind and transcending that need for information, using that in the most powerful way and the most evolved way by folding in and layering in the intuition. If you have one thing to take away from this video for Pluto in the third house, the one lesson to learn here is to slow the mind. Slow the mind, you know, still allow that natural curiosity, but funnel that into things that are the most productive by bringing in that intuition so you know you're guided to that next thing to know that's really going to feed your soul. So that is what I have for this video. You can click the link below to book a private reading. So check that out, and I will see you all in the next video.